Bueno, buen día. Bienvenidos a este taller de Congreso titulado Agricultura regenerativa. Vamos a tener dos oradores que van a dar su presentación en inglés, Lecomte y Nicolás Verschuere. Voy a introducirlos brevemente a ellos para que ustedes entiendan quiénes son. Nicolás es ingeniero agrónomo de la Universidad de Louvain, Bélgica, es cofundador y jefe operacional en Soil Capital y es consultor de campos para varias empresas y fondos de inversión en la temática de agricultura regenerativa. Y Tomás también es ingeniero agrónomo, egresado de la Universidad de Gembloux, Agrobiotech en Bélgica. Tiene una licenciatura en Administración de Empresas de la Escuela Solvay, también de Bélgica. Hizo parte de su carrera en África, en Congo, durante 5 años, en el 2004. Está desde el 2015 trabajando en Soil Capital y es el encargado de gestionar los servicios con los distintos partners o socios con agricultores y empresas en distintas regiones del mundo. La charla un poco lo que va a tratar es acerca obviamente de agricultura regenerativa, como lo dice el título. Les dije que va a ser en inglés, después va a haber espacio para preguntas que obviamente las pueden hacer en español o en el idioma que quieran, en el chat que tienen a su derecha, y se las vamos a formular a ellos en inglés para que puedan responderlas. La presentación va a durar alrededor de unos 30-35 minutos y después dejaremos espacio para completar. Quizás llegaremos a la hora y monedas de charla. Bueno, sin más los dejo a Nicolás y Tomás. Cambio un poco al inglés para darle el espacio a ellos. Tomás, Nicolás, I already made your presentation and your records of what you are going to talk. So I leave you both with your presentation to share it and to get to know what is regenerative agriculture.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Thank you for hosting us for this presentation in the Congress. We are very happy to participate for the second time. I will quickly introduce myself. I'm Thomas Lecomte, Head of Farm Management Services at Soil Capital. I'm an agronomist, and I'm here in Belgium, and I'm joined with my colleague, Nicolás.
Yes, Nicolás Verschuere. As Thomas said, I'm an agronomist as well, working at Soil Capital for the last 6 years. And happy to be able to share with you from far away, from Europe, today.
So we'd like to start with a few statements about the situation of agriculture, especially here in Europe, to give you a little bit of impression of what is our perspective, especially around the farm economics. For the last 10 years, what happened between 2005 and 2016 in the EU in terms of average farm size, average number of farms, and the net farm income per hectare. Well, the numbers are quite impressive because the average farm size has increased up to almost 40%, while the number of farms, of course, has decreased, which has a direct consequence of a strong reduction in the net income per farmer. So the farms are basically losing a lot of profitability these last years in Europe, and that's an important fact to take into consideration. Another important impact is on human health. Everyone knows that for the last 10 or maybe 20 years, there's an important increase in disease, and especially what we call the autoimmune disease. There are many reasons and many sources for these problems. There's not direct relation with agriculture, but we know that probably food and farming practices are probably linked to this impact on human health. And a third impact that we want to emphasize is the, the carbon impact, and especially the climate change relation with the CO2 sequestration. We all know that the atmosphere contains a lot of carbon, as well as the biosphere. But the most important figure that a lot of people not always understand is the potential of the pedosphere to store and sequestrate carbon for a long time. In fact, we've been releasing and removing a lot of carbon since the Industrial Revolution using fossil fuel. We now acknowledge that we have a problem with climate and a concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. Well, we also can conclude that today one of the best chances that we have to mitigate this climate change is to focus on soils and on the carbon sequestration of the pedosphere. And the last impact that, the last fact that we want to state here as an introduction is the environmental impact and the loss of biodiversity that we are acknowledging worldwide. We have lost 1 million species during the last decade. 25% of these species have been threatened only within the last decade, which is very short. So it's an effect. It's a situation that is really accelerating for the last years. And again, like with the human health, there's a lot of sources and a lot of reasons for this loss of biodiversity, but we cannot forget that land use change and industrial agriculture are amongst the top 5 drivers of this loss of biodiversity. So these are for us strong facts that drive us every day in the job that we do. And that's probably why we decided somehow 5 or 6 years ago to develop Soil Capital, this small and young company based in Europe, whom we work with. We are a group of independent agronomists and finance professionals who seek to scale regenerative agriculture in order to improve farm economics and environmental performance at the same time. We have different types of services and engagements with our clients. In Europe, we do a lot of farm management, where we are in charge of operations and in charge of the P&L of farming businesses and farms. And we do that with different types of approach, organic and conventional. We also provide technical support or advisory and management services to projects that are more abroad. And I will show you a map of our different involvements in the world. And then we also interact with different types of businesses and food and agricultural players that wants to create impacts, and we help them thinking around their strategy and how to integrate regenerative practices from the fields to throughout their supply chain. This is a quick map showing our experience. One of the specificity at Soil Capital is that we've been quickly involved in quite remote destinations in Africa, Australia, New Zealand, but also more and more in Latin America, and especially in Argentina, where we've been developing fruit support to fruit farms, but more and more to broadacre crops and livestock farming systems in Argentina. Here is a more focused map of what we are doing in Argentina since 2018. We are currently supporting and helping. Now, today we have 4 farms in Argentina that we help developing regenerative agricultural strategy with different approach and different systems. These are the blue dots that you can see on the map, from Entre Rios down to the south of the Buenos Aires province, close to Tandil. It's a total of 11,000 hectares of farms. And then we also have a more advisory relationship with a big group of farms based in Europe, but that own farms in Uruguay and Argentina, where we help them more focusing on the global strategy of the group to transition towards agroecological and reduced pesticide use in these regions. So this is keeping us quite busy, and we are very happy to develop more and more engagement in Argentina, and hope that we'll continue that way. So maybe now we can discuss a bit more about our vision. And Nicolás, if you want to say a few words now about that.
Yes, we wanted to share with you a few ideas, a few points that we are really focused on. From, of course, it's coming from our vision from Europe, but I think that it could be useful for you in Argentina to understand a little bit our point of view. So first point that I wanted to share with you is that we believe that there is a strong link between soil health, plant health, and human health. We can see that the soil health is influencing more and more. We understand the link between the capability of a plant to be resistant to pest and disease. We also understand that the plant health, if we have a high plant health, more and more people understand that and measure that there is of immunity between the plant health and the human, or the livestock who is eating this plant. That's one thing that we study and that we are living in our different projects. There is another point that is quite clear as well, as Thomas was explaining. Our name is Soil Capital, so we are looking at soil health, sustainability, but we are very interested about profitability as well. We believe, and we are seeing in Europe, that the link between the soil health and the farm profitability, and sometimes the farm value, is becoming more and more true. So this is an important driver as well. Another point is that we understand in Europe that we are coming, and we are still in a system where we are reacting more than being proactive. So we have disease, we treat for disease, fungicides. We have an insect, we treat for insect. We have weeds, we treat for weeds with herbicides. And we believe that the future will be much more with an agriculture who is looking to avoid problem. And to avoid problem, it means that you have to be proactive. How to avoid weeds, how to avoid disease, and so on. So proactivity is something that we're trying to put also as a priority for us. In general, again, in Europe, we see that with our clients, the farms who are producing food are in general more productive than the farms who are producing feed. And we believe that in the future, it's important in the farming strategy to try to push as much as possible food. It's not always possible, but it's also a fact in Europe. Another consideration in our vision is that you can hear a lot of people who were saying in the past in Europe, you have to work from field to fork. So it's important to have a link, traceability, and a direct connection between the fields and the fork. We believe today that maybe this needs to be a little bit changed and adjusted, because sometimes the production quantities are too high, or the quality is not corresponding exactly to the demands to the consumer. And we see more and more farmers who are trying to identify what the fork wants in order to produce exactly what the fork wants. And this is also a way to add value to the production. And not produce as much as we can and then sell everything on the commodity market and be completely influenced or impacted by the market, the global market. Another fact as well that we can feel very strongly here in Europe is that the farmers are and will more and more bear the cost of the externalities. So pollution, biodiversity loss, carbon emission, all these things, human health, who are indirectly linked to the farming activities. The trend is that the consumer, the society is trying to charge the farmers for that. It's not always fair, but this is something that we believe we have to take into account and be proactive to understand that in the future, maybe additional tax, additional cost will come on the farmhead, and that's important to consider that. Another important consideration that is stronger and stronger is that we can see that the advanced farmer in Europe will stop using conventional agrochemicals, we believe, in the next 10 years. So there is a strong, still small proportion, but there is a strong direction where you can feel that the agrochemicals are being under pressure, and that it's really important to be ahead of the curve and to try to find a way not to be trapped into that, but to take that as an opportunity more than as an obligation. Another point is that Thomas was talking about the carbon, and we are working on that more and more for the last 1 year, 2 years, and we can see that farm profitability and the carbon sequestration are aligned. Sometimes people believe that if you want to do good for the planet, you will have to accept to reduce your profitability or to reduce your production. We believe that it's not always true, and we are working on that. So that was a few points that I think we wanted to share with you today. So we can summarize these different points into a long-term vision. We believe that today, or let's say yesterday, in the convention, starting from conventional farming, we will go for a low carbon farming. This is quite clear. We can see clear indication from the market, from the stakeholders. We are also seeing on the short, medium term that the pesticides is something that is more and more measured. We can hear already for many years about the residues in the fruits, vegetables. Now it's becoming also more and more mandatory in the grain, and we can feel that in the next 4 or 5 years we will come with a low carbon grain, zero pesticides residue as well. On the longer term, we believe that, as I was saying, the current agrochemical will be banned, and we will have a complete change in terms of agrochemical usage, fertilizers and pesticides. We are also believing that what we call organic regenerative is something that will develop more and more. So how to regenerate soil, how to regenerate ecosystem while producing as much or maybe more than what we are doing today. That's the long term. As an example, we are with our clients trying each time to translate that in a transition pathway, and we as we said, we like to study with the clients and the farmers a way to have a de-risked transition. We don't like, the farmers are already exposed to so many risks linked to the market, linked to the weather, that it's important, we believe, to design transition that are not increasing this level of risk or decreasing the profitability, because in general the farmers need absolutely to keep this profitability. We can see, Thomas told us that we've seen the decrease of profitability in Europe, that is very, very important. Subsidies are there to improve a little bit, but it's really decreasing years after year. So this is the type of strategy we built based on crop rotation, on chemical reduction, fertilizers, and we are trying to set objective for the next 2, 3, 5 years with the farmers. We are also trying to analyze with metrics, with indicators on water, on soil health, on carbon, to understand if we are following the objective properly. So this is a disciplined transition with metrics, a little bit like when we do a budget and we see if we follow the budget or not. What I've just said is that we also like to avoid what we call the J curve. The J curve is this transition where we have to go in a deep, in a low productivity or low profitability for a few years before going back to normality and doing better. We believe that today it's impossible for the majority of the farmers to invest in a transition. So we are convinced that we can build transition without this low productivity. It's just a matter of knowledge, experience, and the right techniques, technology. A few examples now, and I will give the word to Thomas. So you will see a few pictures about what we've been discussing. It's a summary, but so you understand what we mean.
Yeah, so it's a kind of an attempt to put some pictures and concrete examples of around all these theoretical approach and principles. One of the key principles that we are following on a regular basis into our transition is to add biodiversity in the system. And there's many ways to do it. And the idea is really to focus on adding diversity, like we say, in time and in space. Increasing the number of species, for example, in cover crop is something that we do more and more, and we regularly now cultivate cover crops with 7 or 10 different species, and it has direct impacts into the development and the biomass production, the impact also on the soil health results. It has many very good impacts, by the way, and actually some other examples are to mix together what we call associated crops, cereals with legumes like wheat and pea, or lentils with oats. There are many examples that we are trying and developing on a daily basis. The idea of adding this diversity is really to create a system that is much more resilient, both economically but also environmentally, since the competition and the production of soil exudates, root exudate in the soil, really helps to foster the environmental sustainability in the soil. And we can acknowledge that this can be done with quite reduced cost, and that is something that is affordable to many farming systems and many farmers in general. It's just a bit more complex into the way to design it, but not difficult or not unaffordable in terms of economics. Another interesting example is what we call the relay cropping. There are more and more farming systems in the US, in Australia, and I guess more and more as well in Latin America. The idea of relay cropping is also to add diversity, but also to accelerate the transition between two crops. For instance, here, to plant soybean, for example, 1 month before in the middle of the wheat crop, so that the farmers can save 1 month in terms of crop cycle in this production and accelerate the harvest of the soybean, or have a longer cycle of soybean, together with the weed control, but also the interaction between the legumes and the cereals in terms of nitrogen. There are many interesting impacts. Again, it's a bit more complex, but complexity should not be seen as something that is negative or hard to do. Again, reducing agrochemicals and synthetic pesticide is, for us in Europe, definitely an objective. It's we feel a strong pressure from many sides. But the good news is that there are more and more realistic alternatives and interesting solutions that are more and more accurate. And for example, here we are showing some typical example of mechanical weed controls. 10 or 15 years ago, it was not the case, but today in Europe, you can basically control weeds into wheat crop or or basically most of the broadacre crops with the same accuracy and basically close to the same cost of a chemical control, with somehow like 85% accuracy. And this is due to the big level of innovation, of accuracy in the equipment, and some development into the spacing of the crops and agronomical strategy. And we think this should also be part of some future development as well in Latin America somehow. So diversity, cover crops, one of the key elements as well is to make sure that we have living roots and green cover all year round. This is, I think, what you guys call in Argentina, Agricultura, Siempre, Verde. We also try to follow the same approach in Europe, and this is a typical example of what we would do here in 1 or 2 months in Belgium, in France. Here you can see this type of picture where you have a farmer that is rolling his multi-species cover crop. It's a cover crop with maybe 6 or 7 different species with a very high biomass. And in one pass, without chemical control, there is a direct seeding of winter barley, for example. So this is making sure that we add diversity, we reduce tillage, and we cover the soil all year round. Maybe a last point that is key also in this transition is to integrate as much as we can the communication or the contact between livestock and crops. That's something that is quite obvious, agronomically speaking, but that we've been forgetting in Europe as well, and quite a lot as well in countries like Argentina. When we travel there, we go there with Nicolás. Most of the time we see a lot of very large and intensive and very productive cropping systems on one side of the road, and then on the other side, a lot of intensive livestock systems, but the communication between the two are not really existing. And meanwhile, there are a lot of advantages when you can reconnect cattle and crops. And we think there are a lot of opportunities and ideas that make sense and that can be implemented into farming systems that want to transition towards regenerative agriculture. For example, here on the picture, you can see sheep that are grazing a cover crop before the final destruction of the cover crop and the following next cash crop. I guess maybe now Nicolás could say a few words around that tool that we are developing here in Europe.
So I was saying that carbon is becoming an interesting metrics that we are studying for the last 2 years. We believe that a farm that is optimizing carbon and finance is probably a farm that has a high sustainability. And we've been building a platform and that we started now in Europe to make farmers able to compare their financial performance, also to improve their farming practices and to certify carbon in order to be paid for the carbon that is sequestered. So this is useful for the farmers. This is also useful for the agribusiness. We are working with a few agro industry in Europe in order to help them to transition the production into regenerative agriculture. We believe that again the carbon indicators are interesting to measure how the farm is performing or not. So we will definitely talk to you about this maybe a little bit more next year, because for the moment we just start in Europe, and we have a few projects starting in Argentina as well. We just for your information, we will work with a few farms to develop this concept of regenerative agriculture, carbon sequestration in the next month for a few years with Quilmes, INTA, Aapresid. So that's something we can discuss probably later and maybe next year to debrief a little bit during the same Congress.
Okay, so I think that's the end of this short presentation. We are very happy to get your questions and try to answer. And Thomas, thank you very much for the translation again, and sorry for not being able to be fully proficient in Spanish. Maybe next year.
Yes,
that's okay. Thank you, Thomas and Nicolás. Excellent presentation. Was very clear. And we have some questions. So, and we have time for the questions. So I will open the discussion for that. First of all, one of the questions was, what is the position of the concept of regenerative agriculture in terms of GMO crops, right? We know that the no-till system in Argentina, when it started to develop, it was by the hand of the GMO crops, right? And now we are seeing a trend to go to less use of pesticides, but also a trend of having no GMO crops in some farms. So what is the approach of regenerative agriculture in these terms?
I can answer. I think that there is no strong focus on pro or cons GMO in this regenerative agriculture concept. At least in our company Soil Capital, we are not really focused on that. What we see in countries like Argentina or Brazil, where GMO has been pushed a lot and has been the concept that has been improved a lot the last few years, the last decades, is that maybe this system has been pushed too far, and we see the consequence. We can see that there is a question regarding the resistance. There is a question with resistance of the weeds or insecticides. These GMO also brought some question about the intensive usage of a few molecules. And this is, I think this was a very good solution to go into this zero tillage system. We believe that today, and we can see that already in Argentina, that there are a lot of opportunity to go further than that, because of course there is no one solution, and GMO is not the solution, or glyphosate resistant crop are not the solution. We know that we are facing new challenges, and this needs to be solved. We believe that the principle of regenerative agriculture that we discussed are really adapted to solve this the next challenge for GMO problems, if I can say. But the GMO itself, I don't think that this is the point. This is the consequence around the GMO system.
Yeah. It's more about the outcome rather than the technology itself. Yeah. Mm.
That's pretty clear. And related to that, and you mentioned that the path or the horizon is to go to regenerative, maybe organic agriculture, right? And how you see that kind of transition, maybe in Argentina, right? To go to, I know that that's a vision for a long term, maybe a few years ahead, and we are always looking at the short term here. But how you see that can be possible or not in Argentina, going to less use of pesticides, no GMO, or let's say no GMO, but using other kinds of crops. How you see that? You see it in Argentina as possible, or what are the threats to go into that direction?
Well, in terms of if we are really looking at Argentina and the main cropping systems we've been visiting and seeing so far, one of the main threats is resistance to herbicide. I mean, all the new resistant weeds, and there are, I guess, every year or every 5 years more and more resistant weeds, and this is becoming a problem. And we can see that the race to fight this problem with using more and new chemicals is actually already lost race. And one of the solutions we see there is more to, like we were discussing, integrate more diversity and try to build back soil resilience and the capacity of the plants to be to defend themselves and to organize a cropping system that is more less susceptible to be competed by weeds and or disease at the same time with disease or insects. So if the goal, and that's what we see here in Europe, is to reach to crops that are or systems that are organic and regenerative, the most important thing right now is to start adding diversity and have systems that are less simple, more complex, but also more robust and resilient to change, especially in the context of climate change as well. That's something that makes a lot of sense.
What we can see also is that the markets are in Europe, in United States, pulling this kind of agriculture. Nobody knows what will happen in the next 5 years, but it is clear that more and more people, and today the young generation, is really sensitive to what we do or what we don't do for the planet, and even the people who doesn't have lots of financial resources are investing more into their food, the quality, and this is what we see in Europe. It is clear that in Argentina it's a different context, but we can see in Europe, in Asia, in United States that this is the same trend. So I think it's going to come in Latin America in the future. I don't know when, but it's the market will play a role.
Well, that was one of the other comments that I was trying to say to you. I mean, the commercialization of these transition products is key in the development of these practices, right? Because you mentioned one of the key elements of regenerative agriculture was the profitability of the farms. So I think that in the future we will have to have some signal from the market to scale in this. In Europe now it's a reality, and it will take more time here, maybe in Latin America. And one of the other questions that they formulated it was regarding cover crops, that you mentioned that you work with different cover crops techniques. When you make a mix of species, we would say in a cover crop, right? You are thinking more about the soil health, or you're thinking more about the crop that is coming after that cover crop, or maybe you're thinking both ways. But what is the approach of soil capital in cover crops in that terms?
The answer could be it's both of the aspects, the soil health and the following crop. And the general thoughts or the rationale behind designing and choosing a cover crop mix is, of course, one of the first parameters is the next crop. And for example, just to simplify, when we are going to have a cereal crop, we will try to have more legumes in the mix of the cover crops so that there's more nitrogen fixation for the following crops. And if the main cash crop that will follow is going to be a legume in this case, or a crop that needs less nitrogen, then we try to do the opposite and to produce biomass with, for example, like you guys do a lot in Argentina with rye or another types of grass. But then there are also other parameters like soil decompaction or weed control. There could be a list of 5-6 main criteria that we try to follow and use it as a tool to choose and design the best cover crop. One of the key elements as well is winter or not, frost or not, etc. And
yeah, I would say that the main goal, because we've been playing with these parameters for the last 10, 15 years, today, at least in our operations in Europe, Belgium, we are trying the first goal is to try to produce soil coverage and high biomass, and a diversity of biomass, because we understand that, as you know, soil is like a cow, and the microorganism of the soil likes to have a diversified meal. So and if possible, lots of food. One thing that we are maybe looking at for the next crop is the water availability. For example, today in Argentina, you have trends to be dry. So this is something we will look at very carefully. The destruction of the cover crop and the competition of the cover crop for the next crop, because it is clear that in a dry environment, with a limited budget of water, you have to be careful. That would be, I would say, the main point for the next crop. But honestly, some people say that because if you put legumes before cover crop with legumes before soybean or something, that you can have a green bridge and diseases coming from the cover crop to the next crop. I think that I've never experimented strong disease linked to the previous cover crop if the cover crop was mixed. I don't believe that there is a high risk to have this green bridge in our experience.
That's good. That's good. And one thing that is good, maybe you to mention, how many species are you working with cover crops? Because here, as you may know, we have some limits in terms of, let's say, market availability of different species of cover crops. But I know that you in Europe have a lot of species to choose, right? Can you mention how many you use in general terms, obviously? No?
Yeah, the most important actually is not really. So in general here, what we like to do is 6-7 species, not much more. We can have mixes that goes higher, but the most important is not really the total number of species, is more the distribution between the different botanical families. And it's quite interesting to try to have grasses, legumes, brassicas and other families like that. It's better to have 5 species with different botanical families than 8 species and only grasses and 1 legume, for example. But yeah, commonly what we would do here is between 5 and 7 when we can.
Okay. Yeah. So, but in that terms, and linking to another question, do you think that the possibility of Argentina is to add more crops to the system? Because we are used to do, and you mentioned that with the livestock integration, that we are used, maybe because of the market structure, or maybe because of our farm history or whatever, we are used to do not too many crops as maybe we can, right? So what is your vision about that? Because I know that you have some insights about that. And maybe what's the experience in Europe, right, of adding more crops to the systems?
Yes, of course, this is not an easy thing to change. When the market is not there, and it's easy to say in Argentina you should plant more sunflower, for example, in the region of Pergamino, or and the market is not really there. The price is not very attractive. The profitability is not there. So I understand perfectly that you cannot again push farmers to go for a low productive crop. I think that the first thing to have in mind is not and maybe again this is difficult in Argentina with a short-term mindset in general, but try to make a profitability, try to calculate your profitability not on 1 year, but it's important for a farmer to try to make a profitability, an average, to optimize the average profitability more than the short-term profitability. And I know that, again, this is difficult in Argentina, but I know that some farmers are doing that and investing in a crop. For example, that oats is a very good crop with an allelopathy effect on the next crop to clean the land. It's maybe not the most profitable crop, but you know that you're going to save money for the next crop if you put oats before another crop. You know that if you start producing legumes, you're going to save in nitrogen. And so I think that this is the first mindset to have. Another thing is that if you don't have the possibility to add diversity in your rotation, you have to absolutely to invest in diversity between your cash crop, and that's where cover crop and diversified cover crop are very important. If you don't have any brassicacea in your rotation, put some mustard, put some canola or colza in your cover crop, because you're going to add this family in your system. Another thing that I think in Argentina you have a lot of potential. This is a country of livestock, of animals, and so if you can bring in your rotation 1 year and a half of pasture, of grazing, doing capitalization or buying, because you have your own livestock, will help a lot to improve soil, to reduce your costs for the next crop. So I think that there are different elements, and of course I believe also that we talk about market. Even if Argentina is a big country looking for the export market and the community market, there is also opportunity to develop niche market, smaller market, and more direct connection with the consumer abroad or in the country. And this is maybe where you can start developing the crop that are not really with high demand on the market. But that's another way also to introduce new variety in your rotation.
Well, that's pretty clear. And maybe one of the last questions is the difference between regenerative agriculture and agroecological or agroecología, that maybe they mentioned here. You will say that it's the same, you will say that they have some difference, or they are complementary. What are your thoughts in that comparison between agroecological and regenerative agriculture?
Yeah, it's clear that these terms have been used quite a lot into different contexts, and it's sometimes a bit complicated to make the difference. What we do is regenerative agriculture, and we have our own way to define it, and it's really focused on the agronomical practices, on the farming practices. I think that the official definition of agroecology integrates both, of course, agricultural production, environmental impact, but also social impacts. If you look at the official origin of the definition of agroecology, one of the difference between that and regenerative agriculture is the social impact, which is, of course, very important, but something we focus less in Soil Capital because that's not our first skills. But the rest is, if we only take the agronomical part, the difference between agroecology and regenag is quite the same.
Yeah, and I think also that we can see a lot of definition of different type of agriculture, conservation agriculture, regenerative, permaculture, agroecology. I think we're all talking the same sort of language, and with sometimes, most of the time, the same principle. This is also why it's important to focus on the practices. It's also important to focus on the metrics, what we want to reach. And this is why we are focusing now. I was talking about my soil capital and the carbon. We believe it's maybe a simplification, an oversimplification, but we believe that, again, a farm that is sequestering carbon and a farm that is making money is a sustainable farm. In most of the case, we can find exception, but I think that those are two interesting and important directions. And maybe as a conclusion, we could say that in soil capital, we define regenerative agriculture based on practices, a set of practices that are shared with agroecology and so on, but also in results, and the results are mostly focused on the carbon and on the finance profitability.
Good. Okay, so we are reaching the final. Just one last thing. They ask about how you see this carbon sequestration trend as well. If you see that will be a driver in the next few years, and it's obviously that regenerative agriculture can contribute to that carbon sequestration. But I think that the question is more directed to what is going to happen in the next few years. Maybe we don't know that, but what are your thoughts in terms of carbon sequestration? You think that is something that is coming to stay for a few years, for a long term, or is just a new trend? How you see that?
It's quite clear for the moment. There is a strong appetite and willingness from the different stakeholders in the farming industry to go into that direction, because again, the common sense show that a farming system that is increasing the carbon sequestration is generally good for the environment, and that together with carbon is attached the water infiltration capacity, the agrochemical usage, and all these other benefits. So in Europe today, it's the start, but we have now a few companies who have committed to pay farmers to sequester for their sequestration of carbon. We can see that in the United States, it's also something that is becoming a reality. It's of course not the global market. It's a voluntary market. So companies who want to mitigate their carbon emissions wants to pay. But we are convinced, given the big companies we are talking with now, that it's gonna become global or more and more common in the next years.
Well, thanks. That's good, and we reach 1 hour, so it was really good, really clear. I'm happy to have Soil Capital again in el Congreso Aapresid. Así que bueno, cambio al español, para terminar, ya llegamos a la hora del taller. Debajo están los contactos de Thomas Lecomte y la página de Soil Capital para cualquiera que tenga una consulta. Anyone who has any request, there's your contact there from Soil Capital. So that's it, and I appreciate your time. Gracias por el tiempo y bueno, los invitamos a que sigan en el Congreso.
Thank you very much. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Tomás. Hasta luego.
Gracias. Chao, chao.